Okay, let us embark on the third video in this Games of the Decade countdown. You've already seen 100 to 91, which means that today we're going to be looking at 80 to 71. As always, these are my personal choices. There are a lot of games that I have not yet got around to playing that probably would stand a good chance of getting into this, but they just didn't meet the mark because I just didn't get around to playing them. So there you go. Feel free to let me know your choices for the best games of the decade, and I will start now on number 80. So I was really looking forward to Mirror's Edge Catalyst. I loved the first Mirror's Edge. I thought it was just a really fun game that did its very unique thing. You know, it had the first person parkour, and it was one of those games that you just wanted to, I just wanted to play it and get good at it and all that stuff. So, you know, the announcement of a sequel got me very excited. I was also kind of okay with the idea of it being an open world. A lot of people had a problem with that, but I thought having that freedom works with the narrative, works with the parkour, and I was interested to see how they would do that. They didn't quite nail it, unfortunately. Sometimes the open world design wasn't very good. There's a lot of feeling that, like, you kind of have these linear paths that kind of are stuck together really haphazardly as an open world, rather than an open world that you could run around in and find all these different routes in, which is unfortunate. But also it has some of that typical open world bloat of very repetitive missions that just exist for content reasons. Apart from that, the gameplay is still really slick. They added a few extra things, like a grappling hook was added, which isn't quite in the spirit of parkour, but here we go. There's a couple of other things that they added from what I remember. They kind of refined the combat a bit as well. It felt a lot more satisfying this time around. The first game, it kind of felt a bit tacked on, whereas this, it kind of blended into the parkour a bit better. It looks great, the city looks great, and the soundtrack is really good. It's still got that really superb Solar Fields soundtrack, but also the theme song by Churches is what got me into Churches as a band. That alone is why it's here. So again, I've only really played the first few Assassin's Creed games, and this one I really liked. Assassin's Creed 2 was a great game. It does in fact miss this list because it came out in 2009 and therefore is not part of the 2010s. But this felt like a really cool follow-up to it. I wasn't 100% sure about carrying on Ezio's story, but this chapter kind of felt necessary in a weird way. Assassin's Creed 2 had a very rushed ending where you kind of spend about 5 minutes in Rome, you punch the Pope in the face, and then the game ends. Spoilers, by the way. Brotherhood kind of let you go into Rome and explore it a lot more, because the game was kind of building up to Rome and then you never really go to Rome, so this one lets you go around Rome. Hey, but it kind of carries on that thing with the Borgias, and I really liked that storyline. It got me really just interested in that bit of history as well. But yeah, and also at this point the formula hadn't quite gotten stale for Assassin's Creed, which helped. This was still when I was really kind of massively into it and really enjoying it. And yeah, it's still a really good game, even if that formula has gotten a little bit tired. But, you know, solid storyline I really liked, and it finally let you explore Rome, which both of those things are really good. And Ezio's a great character, but he did not need 3 games. Revelations is not on this list for a very good reason. That game is pointless. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the next game. What is it? It's hard not to like the Luigis Mansion games, and Luigis Mansion 2, while not quite as good as the first one, it was still a really nice game. You get to explore a spooky mansion, well, a series of spooky mansions, as Luigi, just constantly terrified, busting ghosts. Yeah, and you know, as the great prophet once said, busting does make me feel good. Anyway, the point of the matter is that Luigi's Mansion is a very nice little game. It's got some really nice atmosphere for a game that is Nintendo's version of spooky. It's got a very sort of cartoony, spooky atmosphere, but it kind of balances it nicely, so it's still a little bit creepy, but obviously not actually creepy in any way, because it's Mario, for God's sake. Some of the encounters are really interesting, really fun, that sort of really use like your features of the vacuum really well. But yeah, I really liked this. I did feel like the mission structure that it had kind of worked against it a little bit. That I kind of wanted to just explore the mansion like you did in the first game a bit more. But apart from that, this was just really fun, really solid, nice little Mario side spin-off thing. Yeah, it was good. It was good. Always fun to go ghost hunting with Luigi. BioShock Infinite is a very divisive game. There's a lot of problems with it, but there's a lot to like about it as well. I'm very much in the camp of I really liked it. If I didn't, it wouldn't be at 77 on this list. But I do acknowledge its flaws. You can tell that it was an ambitious game that was doing a lot of interesting stuff, but you also get the feeling that a lot of those ideas had to be stripped back just so the game could be finished. And you do kind of have a little bit of a linear structure going on that the first game didn't have, which is a little bit unfortunate because Columbia was a really, really interesting setting, and it would have been cool to get to explore it a bit more, delve into it a bit more. Not that I particularly want to know most of their residents' views on black people, for instance, but, you know, as a setting, for a narrative, it was interesting and really cool, and I really liked some of the weird places that the game went, because you had just this weird dimensional travel that existed within the plot, which also weirdly tied into the soundtrack, and I really have to commend them for some of the soundtrack choices that they made. One thing you're probably going to notice from this list is I will praise, if the game has a good soundtrack, I will praise it to high hell and probably bump it up a few positions as a result. But anyway, you've got like a carnival version of Girls Just Want to Have Fun, for instance. And of course, the first time I played the game, I encountered the Barbershop Quartet singing God Only Knows, and I just freaked out. I was like, what? It like completely made me question my view on reality, because I was like, is that song in 1912? That doesn't seem right. I thought that was written in the 60s. And then obviously, you know, that in itself kind of gave away some stuff that happened later on in the game, and I thought that was kind of cool. I was like, ooh, what's this all about? So that was a good introduction. But yeah, I really liked some of the weird dimension travel-y stuff, and the gameplay was still fun, even if it was a bit too linear. Inside is another one of those weird, mysterious Playdead games that followed on from Limbo. It's a really tense and atmospheric cinematic platformer. It's very ambiguous in what's actually going on. So you play as this boy. At the start of the game, he wanders through a forest. There are people in the forest who are either looking for him or they're just trying to prevent him from getting in. It's not clear. You kind of wander through some farmlands and various things like that, and you end up in this weird facility where there are people being mind controlled or something, and you just kind of move through this facility, and it's sort of slow-paced cinematic platformer vibe that you expect from the genre, and it's not clear what's actually happening a lot of the time. It's not quite as good as its predecessor, which was Limbo, but it's got plenty of its own charm, and the ending gets very, very weird. I have no idea what that ending is about. I'm not going to spoil it, but it goes places, and I don't understand. But there's some really clever puzzles, there's some really interesting concepts going on there, even if it's not entirely clear what's happening. It's a little bit too obtuse for its own good, but on the whole is very tense, very atmospheric, and just a really interesting experience all around. So yeah, I talked about Infamous 2 and how I don't feel it's the best one in the series. It's not this one either, but I do find the PS4 Infamous games a lot more stylish, a lot more colourful, and just a lot more fun. We'll get onto more of that later, but for First Light specifically, this was like a standalone expansion to Second Son. As such, it's very short and it's very limited in its scope, which kind of works against it, despite the fact that it told the story of Fetch, who was a really interesting character. Her story was really interesting. Playing around with her powers was a lot of fun. A lot of the gameplay is built around challenges, and while they're fun, it again does kind of limit the scope of the game. I think it is a factor of it being a downloadable expansion to Second Son, so a lot of this kind of carries over from that. But it does lay a lot of groundwork that makes me think I would love to see much more of this. I would love to see more of Fetch's story, a much bigger game with her, and maybe even just kind of carry on, if Infamous is ever to come back and continue, just have more of these sorts of stories where it's different people and how they're affected by different powers and that sort of thing. I think would be really interesting. There's a lot of good character stuff going on in this game, really fun powers, and just a good time all around. Oh hey, it's one of them Mario games that I struggle to describe in any sort of significant way. Yeah, it's Super Mario Galaxy 2. It's another really well-made Mario 3D platformer. It's one of those series that you can kind of rely on being good, even if it's not necessarily revolutionary. Which, to be fair, Super Mario Galaxy 2 isn't as good as its predecessor. But it's got some good ideas of its own, and it's got a lot of really imaginative levels. We got Yoshi. His inclusion was really nice, especially with things like the pepper levels, where Yoshi would swallow a pepper and then just run at the speed of sound. Those were a lot of fun, and there's a lot of other stuff like that I really liked. I thought was really good. Again, not quite as good as the first one. I think a big part of that was that it was built around the face ship rather than the observatory from the first game, and I found the observatory more interesting. There was a lot more stuff going on there. They kind of really played with some narrative there, which was lost in this one, but the sort of core Mario experience was there, and it was still very, very fun. Again, it's Mario. You can't really go wrong with a Mario game, and Super Mario Galaxy 2 was a lot of fun. Even if towards the end it did kind of get frustrating, but that's happened plenty of times with Mario. Really good 3D platformer, worthy entry to the series, really. Yeah. Volume was a really interesting game. It took the story of Robin Hood, which we all know and love. We all know the story of Robin Hood, and it made it more modern, and it kind of incorporated Metal Gear style VR missions. So the idea behind the game is that you are going around these locations trying to avoid being seen by guards and trying to pick up these gems. And it's all part of a wider narrative that this is like training. This is all being live streamed, and it's like a modern day Robin Hood who's doing all these VR simulations, and they're all like, all the maps are supposed to be like the homes of the rich, and it's supposed to be encouraging people to go out and steal from the rich, kind of thing. And it's sort of set in this very dystopian future. It's got a really, really interesting way of telling its story. Just it's mostly told through Rob Loxley giving away, sort of addressing his audience a little bit, but also you've got the AI within the computer, voiced by Danny Wallace. He's a big part of this. So you've got like messages that come in from supporters. You've got Dan Bull comes in and does a rap about you, and then you've got Jim Sterling sort of going like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And then you've got like the big corporate bad guy himself will eventually start talking to you, and that's Andy Serkis, so you know that's always cool. And there's a lot of really cool imaginative stuff going on in Volume. It's a little bit repetitive, but apart from that, it's just a really good experience, and I think Mike Bithell was onto something really good with this one, and I just really liked the concept of it as well, just this modern Robin Hood retelling. It's good stuff. And sure enough, after mentioning that Inside wasn't as good as Limbo, here's Limbo. So Limbo, insert most of my comments about Inside. It's another tense, atmospheric, cinematic platformer. You play as this boy who initially starts wandering through the woods, but the big difference is that this one's all in flat black silhouette almost, so you can't really see a lot of the world around you, not as much as inside. But that's kind of part of the appeal of Limbo, is that sort of mystery of what's in this world. It's this dark, creepy kind of horror atmosphere to it. Not least because quite early on you get chased by a giant spider, so that's always a thing of nightmares. But yeah, it's just as ambiguous and as slightly frustrating as Inside would be. But I feel that Limbo makes a bit more sense in its narrative. It's not clear if its narrative is there, and a lot of it is theories, but a lot of people's theories kind of line up quite nicely, whereas Inside no one really knows what the hell happened there. Limbo is a bit more straightforward, and I feel like the ambiguity works much better here than it does in Inside. And I think some of the puzzles are just a bit more imaginative than they would go on to do in Inside as well. Like, the gravity stuff towards the end of the game was really, really cool. It was frustrating, but it was really cool. Which, to be honest, is a description of the whole game. Frustrating, but really cool. Really tense, really atmospheric, really spooky, and just a really, really interesting experience. So a lot of the criticisms that I brought forward about Shadow of the Tomb Raider can be applied to Rise of the Tomb Raider. Namely, when Shadow was announced, I realised that I'd forgotten pretty much everything that happened in Rise of the Tomb Raider, which isn't really a good sign when that happens. But that said, I do remember having a blast with it when I played it the first time. And looking back on it properly, I realised that, they'd done a lot of stuff right with Rise of the Tomb Raider. They'd really refined a lot of the gameplay systems from the previous game, and I also feel like the writing is starting to improve a little bit. Lara felt like she was starting to properly come into her own as a character. It's unfortunate that a lot of that kind of got undone in Shadow, but she started heading down a path that seemed good, even if she didn't quite get there yet. But even though I forgot a lot of what happened in the game, there were two things that stood out to me. One was the Croft Manor section, and you get the butler in the freezer business becomes canon, and the Baba Yaga stuff, which obviously drawing off the sort of Russian folklore, was really, really good. I really loved that mission. The only problem with both of those things is that those are from DLC additional missions. They weren't in the main game. And that's kind of where my problems come from. I feel like those two things kind of represent what I want Tomb Raider to be a lot more than what the main game was. So, yeah, I think Rise of the Tomb Raider was really, really fun, but what I want to see more of with this series going forward is that Baba Yaga mission is kind of a template. It was really imaginative, it really played with the folklore, and it was just really interesting to explore that section, and more of that would have put this much higher on the list. And that is it for another video. We have gotten all the way to number 70, so that's what we're doing tomorrow, is 70 to 61. Let me know what you thought of my choices so far, or let me know your predictions of what you expect to see on this list going forward. Yeah, we've got a bunch more stuff to come over the next few days, and I hope that you're enjoying this countdown of my top 100 games of the decade, and I will see you with some more tomorrow.